We call Tai Lung a villain. We watch him lose. We move on. But nobody stops to ask the question that actually matters. What if he did everything right? What if he trained harder than anyone, sacrificed more than anyone, became exactly what he was told to become? And it still wasn't enough? Because that's not a villain story. That's something far more uncomfortable. That's the story of wasted potential. And the hardest part about it is that the people who wasted it weren't him. Tai Lung's story begins before he could even walk. A snow leopard cub abandoned on the steps of the Jade Palace. No name, no family, no reason anyone had to care about him. But Shifu did. He picked him up, looked at him, and saw something. Maybe he saw potential. Maybe he saw a legacy he could shape. Either way, he brought him in, not just as a student, as something closer to a son. And that decision, however well-meaning, was the first brick in a wall that would eventually crush Tai Lung completely. Because Shifu didn't just train him, he told him who he was. He looked at this abandoned cub and said, "You are destined for greatness. You are the Dragon Warrior. This scroll, this title, this future, it was made for you." And Tai Lung believed every single word. Why wouldn't he? This was the only man who had ever chosen him. So Tai Lung trained. And he didn't just train hard. He trained like someone whose entire sense of self depended on it, because it did. Every form he mastered wasn't about kung fu. It was about staying worthy in the eyes of the one person who had ever loved him. Every sleepless night, every broken bone, every moment he pushed past the point where anyone else would have stopped. It wasn't ambition driving him. It was fear. The quiet, terrifying fear that if he ever stopped being exceptional, Shifu would stop choosing him. That's the trap nobody talks about when we celebrate gifted people. We see the discipline and call it strength. We see the results and call it greatness. But sometimes what looks like drive from the outside is desperation on the inside. Tai Lung became the greatest student the Jade Palace had ever seen, and not one moment of it truly belonged to him. Then came the day he had been building toward his entire life, the Dragon Scroll. The highest recognition in all of Kung Fu. Tai Lung stood in that hall, having checked every single box, every technique mastered, every trial passed, every expectation exceeded. He wasn't just ready. By every measure that had ever been given to him, he was the answer. And then Oogway looked at him and said no. Not because Tai Lung lacked skill. Oogway wasn't questioning his ability. He was looking at something underneath it. Something in the way Tai Lung stood there. Not as a student who had grown, but as a man who needed this to survive. And he saw that the scroll wouldn't complete him. It would only delay the breaking. But Tai Lung didn't hear any of that. He looked past Oogway and looked at Shifu, the man who raised him, trained him, promised him. And Shifu said nothing. That silence is the moment the story actually begins. Not the refusal, the silence. Because Oogway was a stranger to Tai Lung in every way that mattered. But Shifu was everything. And Shifu stood there and let it happen without a word. We call what happened next a villain origin story. Tai Lung snapped. He attacked. He hurt people. He had to be stopped, imprisoned, locked away for 20 years. And the film lets us sit comfortably with that. He got what he deserved. Dangerous leopard, unstable prodigy, couldn't handle being told no. Simple, but that reading skips over something important. Tai Lung didn't crack because he was arrogant. He cracked because everything he had ever been told about himself turned out to be conditional. The love was conditional. The destiny was conditional. The identity he had built from the ground up, the only one he had ever known, was taken away in a single moment by the one person who had the power to save it. And he didn't. What came out of Tai Lung in that moment wasn't evil. It was 20 years of trust exploding all at once. We call it rage because that's what it looked like. But underneath it was something much quieter and much more devastating. It was a person realizing they had never actually been seen. 20 years later, Tai Lung escapes. He fights through the Furious Five like they were nothing. He finds Shifu. He gets his answer, or what's left of one. And then he holds the Dragon Scroll in his hands. The thing his entire life was pointed at. He unrolls it, and it's blank. Just a reflective surface staring back at him. Po had already understood it. The scroll is empty because there is no secret. The power was never in the scroll. It was in the person. It was in believing you were enough before anyone handed you proof. But Tai Lung can't get there. His whole life was built on the idea that something external, a title, an approval, a piece of paper, would finally close the gap inside him, would finally make the love feel permanent. would finally turn all those years of pain into something that meant something. And it's blank. For Po, that emptiness is freedom. For Tai Lung, it is the cruelest possible ending. Because if the scroll was never the answer, then what was any of it for? Here's what Tai Lung's story is actually about. It's not about a prodigy who couldn't handle rejection. It's about what happens when someone builds an entire identity around earning love instead of finding it. When the goal was never really the goal, it was just the price of admission to feeling worthy. Wasted potential doesn't always look like laziness or giving up. Sometimes it looks like someone who worked harder than everyone, sacrificed more than everyone, and still ended up empty because they were running toward the wrong thing for the wrong reason. We've all been handed a version of this. Someone somewhere told you what success was supposed to look like. A degree, a job title, a number in your bank account. A version of yourself that would finally make the people who mattered proud. And you ran toward it. Maybe you're still running, and maybe somewhere deep down, you already know that even if you reach it, it won't feel the way you thought it would, because the scroll was always blank. The question is whether you figure that out before or after you've given the best years of your life to someone else's definition of your worth. The last time we see Tai Lung, he's reaching, still trying to grab the thing that was never going to save him. And that image stays with you if you let it. Because it's not the image of a villain being defeated. It's the image of someone who never got to find out who they actually were, underneath all the training, and the expectation, and the desperate need to be chosen. You still have that chance. The scroll in your life, whatever it is, was always blank. That's not a tragedy. That's an opening. It means the story isn't written yet. It means the version of you that exists beyond other people's approval, beyond the finish lines you inherited, beyond the fear of stopping long enough to ask what you actually want. That version is still possible. Tai Lung never got there. You still can. And maybe that's the whole point.